Hi folks, and welcome to the channel. I'm Brian James. This is Three Rivers Wrench. On this episode, we're going to be installing an air-fuel ratio sensor into Frank, my 1975 Nova. Okay, so why am I installing an air-fuel ratio gauge on my Nova here? Well, let me fill you in. If you haven't watched the channel before, Frank is a new build. Got him done the end of October, beginning of November. It is now February. I did get a few hundred miles on him and ran really good. I had tuned this carburetor with the vacuum gauge. You know, you get it pretty close, but I think it could be better. To find that, balance between power and efficiency, I thought, let's install an air-fuel ratio gauge and just something to play with, What they have out there for these carbs is calibration kit. And I got this from Jegs. It's like 60 bucks. A lot of money for just a few springs and metering jets, but you got to do what you got to do. You can buy those parts separately if you know exactly which ones you need, but hey, I don't know which ones I need. So with that being said, this video is going to focus just on installing the gauge, making sure it works. The next video, when the salt and the snow are all gone, we'll get him out on the road and start playing around. But for now, let's get him down to my shop where I work and get this thing installed. All right, guys, before I get to installing this stuff, just real quick, what comes in the box? Instructions, weld-in bung, along with some electrical butt connectors. We have a wiring harness that goes from the sensor up to the gauge. Another wiring harness, this goes to power and ground to the gauge. The gauge itself, nice black screen, it's got a digital readout along with the analog. They also give you a silver bezel and a white screen if you want to use that. And then the sensor itself. That's it. Okay, looking to position this sensor in the pipe. We're going to come down, a little ways away from the header. I'm not going to install it in the header itself. I'm going to come back to this pipe. I want to stay pretty close, but not where there's a ton of heat, and I don't want to get too far away. The weld-in bung is going to go about in this area. I want to make sure I have clearance for my sensor. That looks pretty good. You don't want to put it here or here because you're going to have condensation, water, etc. in the pipe. It'll contaminate the sensor, kill it. So we're just going to go ahead and take a marker, and it's going to go right about here. So the next step will be unbolting this, lower it down, drill a hole, put the bung in there, weld it up, put it back together. Well, one other thing you want to do, you got to be careful of, guys, is air leaks, exhaust leaks. If you look up here on the bottom of the vehicle, you can see a rust spot. Yeah, that is where that header gasket is leaking and blowing up there. You don't want that. You don't want any air coming, because air will come through this pipe. It'll give you a false reading. And then why the heck are we doing this, right? So when I take this apart, I'm going to make sure, I'm going to probably get some exhaust cement along with the gasket and make sure that's sealed. Okay, I've got the pipe disconnected, and talking about contaminants. See the water, soot in there. Yeah, if your sensor's down below here, it's going to collect all that crap, and you're going to have a dead sensor real quick. Okay, here's my marker spot. I'm going to go ahead and drill the correct size hole and get to welding that bung on. Okay, we're all welded up. Got to put back together. Next step would be to install the sensor. And 7/8 wrench, tighten it up. Good to go. Make sure you snug that down. You don't want it to leak around the sensor, but you don't want to break the thing off either. So, good. All right, sensor's installed. Next deal would be this cable of wires, probably 10 feet, maybe. Anyways, this end goes to the sensor. Then you run it up your bottom of your vehicle. This is going to go through my firewall and then to the gauge. Now what you got to do is figure out, am I going to drill a hole? Am I going to try to use something that's existing, you know, to get it through the firewall? And I'll show you over here on Frank. All right, so on Frank, here's the throttle cable, and then right next to it, I had like a grommet thing in here sealing that off, but I don't know what that's for. Definitely not using it right now. But what I need to do is just make that hole a little bit bigger to pass that through, and I'll get a rubber grommet that'll keep the sharp edges away from those wires. All right, guys, everybody's application is going to be a little different. For me, the wire comes out of the firewall here, and I just tucked it with these other wires. They go behind my master, which is soon to have a booster on it. Down through here, underneath the master, caught up with the speedometer cable, and just ran it down alongside that to the side of the transmission, which the sensor is right there, zip tied, done. Moving on. All right, guys, we got the wires run through the vehicle into the vehicle cabin. The next thing I'm going to focus on is gauge placement. This gauge is a 52 millimeter, or just a shade bigger than 2 inches, you know, through the back of the body here. So if you just have a flat panel, you can cut a hole 2 inches, 52 millimeters, whatever. Plop it through. They give you this plastic bracket that'll sandwich it, and a couple of these brass nut things. You can just finger tight, boom, done. For my car, for Frank here, I don't really want to see digital stuff. I like him old school, and this is really just for me, just to keep an eye on things and for tuning purposes. And what I came up with is, hey, I don't smoke, so I got the ashtray. And we're gonna rig this up so it sits right in there, and then when I'm not using it, shut it, and you don't even know it's there. But anyways, let's get into that. But like I said, you can wherever your heart desires to put one of these things, you can buy one of those plates that'll hang from the bottom of your dash. If you'd like that, put it in your glove box, whatever. Be really tricky if you could fit it into your stock cluster, but for me this will do. And let me show you how I did this one. All right, guys, real down and dirty for my installation, I found out that, hey, this gauge will just about fit perfectly in this ashtray insert deal. So what I had to do was bend this part of the ashtray down. If you look at yours, if you have one similar, push this down, and then this thing will sit right in here. So next thing to worry about is getting to the wires. So I cut a rectangle hole out of this. It's got some sharp edges. So what I did was I took some windshield washer tubing and just cut a slice through it long ways. And if I can do this without cutting myself, just slide it right onto that sharp edge. Same with the upper section. All right. Now you don't have to worry about cutting wires, right? You also notice 2 holes back here I drilled. So what I did was I found some longer screws that were the same thread pitch. I don't know if you can get all thread the same or not, but I found some screws in my garage at home. What I do is I take these brass knurled things, screw them on about halfway. Take this all thread, screw that into there, right? It's gonna make me a liar. Now you got these super long studs. Well, that'll fit right through the back. Takes a while getting it there, but I gotta eyeball the holes. They'll come through the back. Then I just got some washers and nuts and secured that up. All right, got the nuts and washers on the back of this. You can see where the wires are going to go through. Now, as far as the ashtray assembly itself, you can see I had to cut out a square right here. And that's because when this is in here with the gauge and you shut it, it comes up, and if I didn't cut that out, you wouldn't be able to shut it. It would just, this would poke up through. But when that's up underneath the dash, you know, it's going to work good. I'm just going to have to be careful of pinching wires in the back. We're going to have to route those real nice so there's enough play in the wiring so it doesn't pinch or kink. But I think that's doable. All right, guys, almost at the finish line. Just a 4-wire harness here. I'm going to use just 2 of the 4 wires for my application. Some of you guys might use the other 2 wires. Anyways, black chassis ground, red 12 volts. I'm going to make sure I'm going to do a ignition 12 volts, not a constant. Don't want to kill the battery. The other 2, one's for data logging. The other one's a 0 to 5 volt output. I can only assume it's for if you're using maybe a fuel tech or a Holley system. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and hook those up. I'm going to route it through the dash to where the gauge is going to be, and then we'll hook up the gauge and see how this thing works. All right, I have my power and ground hooked at the fuse box down there below the dash. Hard to see. Anyways, the wires are hooked up. They're run behind the dash, zip tied, pretty. Nobody can see them. Comes over. It's coming out my ashtray hole here. I had to run it through the actual ashtray housing itself and then through the opening to the ashtray. Then they're connected in the back of the gauge. Now what I'm going to do now, put this in there, put that in there, put that in there. Simple. All right, finished product. Key on. Nice. All right, let's back this guy outside and see what this thing looks like. All right, guys, that's a wrap on this install. Pretty straightforward. I'd say the only wild card would be getting the bung on the exhaust there. If you don't have a welder, can't weld, not a problem. Any exhaust shop, welding shop, they could do that for you. The other option would be to drill a hole and put a clamp-on style bung. I know Summit and Jegs both carry them. They're not too expensive. Just make sure you don't have any exhaust leaks, because that's going to throw your reading off on your gauge. But with that being said, upcoming episode this spring. Can't wait for spring. I'll be out driving Frank, heavy acceleration, cruising speeds. We're going to get this car dialed in and get as much power out of it as we can. So do me a favor, like, subscribe. Appreciate you guys. Have a good one.